Hey everyone, that is the finished product of this week's build, but you'll see a big mistake that cost me thousands in the end. Check it out. All right, the wood here is some spalted ash. You've seen me work with this before on a little bar top that I made. My idea here was to cut it straight up the gut and make a dining room table with it. That's the Mafell K85 EC track saw. If you look it up, I have a video I'll link above. It's pricier than the Festool, but it can cut deeper and almost 3.5 inches, and it has more power than Festool. Festool is a great track saw, but I ended up going with the Mafell, and I've been super happy with it. These tracks are super straight. I can put two of the F160s together and have over a 10-foot cut. I'm just using one here, obviously, to cut a couple inches off the end. So this ash is about 1.5 inches thick, and you might be thinking that's kind of thin for a dining room table, and it is. My plan here was to not have to take much off at all, but you'll see why this was my big mistake on this project. I definitely recommend going with at least a 2.5 inch slab if you're going to do any piece over 4 feet in length. Even if it is smaller than that, I would recommend just going with a thicker slab, because if you have any sanding, you can take off a little depth and it won't hurt you, and it helps that slab stay super flat and not warp. So I'm cutting it right up the middle, like I said, 2 F160 guide rails, and then I put that little plywood under the slab so that they wouldn't fall all over the place. So I'm cleaning up the bark edge. That's actually going to be on the inside. That's going to be next to the epoxy. And as I'm looking at it, I'm kind of realizing like I'd have to pour a pretty big river through the middle if I wanted to just use these 2 slabs and then fill it with epoxy. So what I end up doing is getting one more slab that I had and cutting out like a little island for the table. I think it ended up being a real unique look. I'm glad that I did it. But I just wanted to use a little more wood and a little less epoxy. Just taking the dual jigsaw and trimming off that little edge, and then I'm going to also clean this bark off with a dull chisel and a mallet. After I get the bulk of it off with a chisel, I'll then come with a Dremel, clean it up there, and then also hit it up with like 80 grit sandpaper to finish it off and have it nice and clean, ready for the pour. Here is my setup. I have to pour in my basement. I've got a kind of a big laundry room. I don't have a big shop. I'm moving soon, but I'm on a 8-foot, or no, it's a 6-foot card table, and it's like a super heavy duty one. But this is where my issue came into play. It was dead flat when we started, and obviously it doesn't end dead flat, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But I had to rig up those special wood beams to be able to clamp those pieces down. All right, here I'm using super clear liquid glass deep pour epoxy, and I was hoping to be able to do it all in the one pour, but I ended up not getting it all done. But I did two bucketfuls here, and you'll see I still probably had 3/4 inch to go, so I had to rough it up, which I'll show you later on. I like the powder epoxy pigment. It doesn't stain any wood from the, I don't know, 10, 15 epoxy projects I've done with walnut and a light color wood like oak or ash. So I prefer the powdered black diamond pigment versus any liquid pigment. Adding some more pigment there. I just wanted it to be a very, very black. And I'm using the stir bit with the Dewalt, but I'm also mixing the sides and bottoms with the stir stick. Especially with a colored pigment, you can really see what's not mixed and what's mixed. So I always give it at least 10 minutes of just stirring and mixing really well. Not only does it help with mixing the color, but just making sure that those A and B components of the epoxy are properly mixed. Otherwise, you can have a table that just never cures, which would be super frustrating. All right, so there's the first bucket. At this point, I thought I was gonna be able to top it off well, but I did not. That was not the case. This was also my first time using MDF as the mold. I have melamine around the sides, but I use MDF on the bottom. And I sprayed it with mold release really, really well. But turns out that I also needed to use Tyvek tape. I did not know that. I thought you could just spray with mold release. Maybe you can. Maybe I did something else wrong, but I sprayed it with mold release and it did not come off at all. I had to have when I took it to the sander to get all sanded down flat, they had to make multiple passes and sand off the MDF because it did not want to come off even with mold release. So in the future, I'm just going to use melamine, but if I only have MDF, I'll just have to line the whole thing with Tyvek tape. All right, that's me scuffing up the epoxy so that it has something to bond to for the second pour. You don't have to go crazy here. You just have to basically rough up the epoxy a little bit so that it can bond well. Here's that top off pour, and this is where I really see the issue that I ran into. The card table that was like had like a metal frame. It bowed on me. The middle sunk in like crazy. So when I saw that, I realized that they were gonna have to do quite a bit of sanding, and this was gonna be a very weak, thin dining table, which was not ideal at all. I knew this was possibly going to be the case, so I did buy like industrial legs that are going to really help support it. But I'll show you videos towards the end where that it didn't work out for me because of that card table bowing. It's time to cut these edges to their final size. The final length of this table was 84.5 inches by 34.5 inches. Making sure everything's decently square, then clamping it down and gonna run that saw. I do recommend cutting alongside first. I should have done that here because I did have to come back and make a small adjustment, but I do tend to slow down that saw when it's going through the epoxy. It cuts it just as well as wood, but I'm just trying to prevent any chip out as much as possible. With my shop being the size that it is, I'm usually working outside in windy and sometimes snowy conditions. And this day wasn't super cold, but I was definitely a bit chilled working out there. Putting those two tracks together again, super handy for making those long straight cuts. All right, after I got it cut down to size, and I think I rough sanded it before this that I didn't show. I'm doing doing an 1/8 inch round over bit here along the edge. It'll just soften that edge a little bit and make it look a little nicer. I did not do that on the bottom side. I left the bottom side square. Flipping it over, I think I did some rough sanding on the top and decided before I finished sanding that top, I would sand the bottom a little bit. I don't sand the top, or I don't sand the bottom as perfect as I do the top, because nobody sees the bottom. I would just waste a couple hours sanding the bottom when nobody sees it. I make sure it doesn't look atrocious, but I'm always sanding the top nicer than the bottom. The industrial sander I take it to leaves some zigzag marks on it, even though they use 120 sandpaper. So I was kind of doing a test here with my Festool seeing how much and how long it would take for me to get a smooth surface and get those zigzag marks out. And it took quite a while. What I typically do and what I change to after a little bit here is I get my DeWalt and put a heavy 80 grit and then I switch up to a 150 grit. And even though that DeWalt leaves more pigtails in the Festool, overall it removes those sanding zigzags much faster than the Festool, so I save a lot of time. And after 150 with the DeWalt, you see I'm using an air compressor. That's a hot tip right there. If you don't have like a nice finish sander and you finish tables with a DeWalt or a different sander like that, I definitely recommend using an air compressor because it'll create a lot less pigtails and all in all basically speed up your work process. So I recommend using a sander that can remove more material first and then coming back with the Festool sander. All right, it's a new day, new cup of coffee. This thing is fully sanded on both sides. I assembled the legs. You can see pretty heavy duty. I wanted the metal to run the full length of the table to help with the thin profile of this dining table. So what I'm doing here is basically marking where I'm gonna drill out for my threaded inserts that I'm gonna use to attach this tabletop to these industrial legs. Now it's a pretty thick leg, so I had to go out and find some special threaded bolts for it, but that wasn't an issue. Home Depot had what I needed. So since the table is about 3/4 inch, I used probably about a 3/8 inch insert here. Not very thick, but I don't think you need a ton. So it's the shortest insert I have actually, but I felt pretty confident that it was gonna hold those legs on perfectly fine, and I've had no issues so far. So drilling out all the holes here, using the vacuum to keep it clean in this laundry room here. Then it was time I put the table legs back on, make sure the holes lined up pretty well, because I've had a hard time in the past making sure that those holes and inserts line up perfect to the holes on the table leg. And this was actually the first time that I didn't have to make any adjustments, so I'm starting to get it down. Here I'm mixing up some clear epoxy. I'm just using it I reuse my cups after the epoxy cures. It's like a brand new cup, and I don't want to throw it out. So it looks like it's black, but it's not. I have an apology to make to the countersink community. In the past, I thought it was kind of a joke and just another purchase that people wanted us to make. But since actually using it, it's super nice. Like, it makes a big time difference, and I love how it sits perfectly flush with these inserts. I use it now for every time I use inserts, and I use it in other ways too. While I woodwork, it comes in handy. So I now use the countersink quite a lot. So I'm just putting here a drop of that clear epoxy onto the threaded insert to make sure that there's no backing out possibility. I really wouldn't be worried if I didn't put the clear epoxy, but some of these inserts are just in epoxy. Some of them are, there's one that's in both epoxy and wood. Having that clear epoxy just made me feel a little bit better. It's important, don't cover the whole threaded insert with epoxy. You'll have a ton pop through the middle and pop on the edges. So just a tiny drop of epoxy on that insert, and it'll work all the way around when you spin that insert in there. Later that day, after those inserts were pretty much cured with that faster hardener of Total Boat epoxy, it was time to finish the bottom. I always do the bottom first. That way, when I flip it over, I don't leave any marks on the top. Here again, like most of my products, I'm using Rubio. This is their Oil Plus 2C. This is their Pure, which is like their most standard finish color that you're going to see. Probably their most popular. You can see I have a issue with Rubio's container, because even if I try to close it tight all the way, it still partially cures on top, and when I shake it up or stir it or anything, there's some cured Rubio in the container that sometimes comes out on into my pour. So the good thing is it's pretty easy to get out. I just used a small little paintbrush and I was able to get the glob out, but I wish they had like a better container for the Rubio that was more airtight. That way I wouldn't have to deal with that, but that's all right. I use this with the accelerator, so it's somewhat cured after 24 hours, but fully cured and water resistant after 7 days. So I'll use the trowel to get it across most of the surface area, and then I just use a lint-free cloth, and I'm not wiping it up here. I'm just spreading it around so it touches all the surface. I'm leaving the edges for when I seal the top. So I'm just doing the bottom side here. I do, before I start wiping it up, I make sure that if I see any dry spots that it's that wax is kind of gone into the wood a little bit more, I'll reapply that spot and just let it really soak in the next 5 minutes. And then you start to wipe, and you go through a ton of cloths. So just get the big cheap box of them. I'll link below the ones I use. I've actually had really good luck with them. They're a good shop rag, and they work well for this. So here I am, just making sure that there's no Rubio left at all. I basically wipe until there's absolutely no yellow coming off on that cloth. It can take a while. I'm putting my back into it, making sure that there's no handprints left behind or anything like that. I actually, once I finish the bottom, I do give it a couple hours. Some people are like, you got to flip it right away, otherwise it's going to warp. This table already was warped, so I was like, hey, what else could hurt it any more than it already is? So no, but I had that philosophy with straight tables too. I'll give them at least 3 or 4 hours to dry on that one side before flipping it over. I think that helps prevent any sticking happening to that not cured side when I'm finishing the top. So same thing again on the top, and then I'm gonna also do the sides with this coat. Every time I apply Rubio, I love 2 things about it. First off, how easy it is to apply. Just, you literally can't mess it up as long as you're getting all the 3-to-1 ratio correct, and then you're wiping off all the excess. It's so easy. Second thing I love is just the color pop that hard wax finish has. It's just, I love finishing those projects. You never know really what you're going to see in the epoxy and what you're going to see in the wood. I'll speed it up for you again here. This is me doing the final wipe off on the top. I'm just doing just 1 coat for this piece. It looked really, really good after the 1 coat. A lot of paper towels again, and then I was basically all wrapped up with this project. I do slow it down a little bit here. You can see it looks finished, but I'm still wiping it down. I'm still getting some Rubio off in certain spots. So I'm really just using as many rags as possible and making sure it's completely wiped up. So here at TD Wood Customs, I try to explain things as well as possible. These are some of the finished shots. You really can't tell it's warped from these angles. When I'm just looking at it, I really can't tell, but I'm not going to hide that it was warped. I'll show you guys just how bad it was. Right here, you can see a little bit of bow right there in the middle. Not like super outrageous, but it's again on the other side as well. And then the ends didn't really have much at all, but you can't really tell unless you're really eye level with it. But I try not to hide anything at all with this YouTube channel. Hopefully that helps you guys make less mistakes. But overall, I mean, it was another fun project. It's listed on Etsy as a defect piece. I'm not the type of guy that's gonna list this as a perfect table when it's not. So it's like 60% off there if you're interested. But thanks again for watching another video.